They called Glenn Ford the fastest gun in Hollywood, and the numbers proved it. 0.4 seconds from holster to target, a record that had been verified by studio timekeepers and respected by every Western star in the business. But on a sweltering July afternoon in 1956, on the dusty set of The Fastest Gun Alive at MGM Studios, Ford was about to discover that there are two kinds of speed in this world. The kind you measure with a stopwatch, and the kind that stops time completely. The showdown that followed wasn't planned by any director or written in any script. It was the moment when Hollywood's most disciplined gunfighter met America's most gifted entertainer, and what happened next would echo through the corridors of MGM for decades. This wasn't just about who could draw faster. This was about the difference between technique and artistry, between precision and magic, between being fast and being unforgettable. And when the dust settled, everyone on that set understood why speed might make you famous, but charisma makes you immortal. The summer of 1956 was blazing hot in Culver City, with temperatures soaring into the triple digits on the sprawling MGM lot. Soundstage 7 had been transformed into a dusty frontier town for The Fastest Gun Alive, a western that was supposed to showcase Glenn Ford's legendary quick-draw skills to a new generation of moviegoers. Ford was at the peak of his career, 40 years old, and one of the most respected actors in Hollywood. But his reputation went beyond acting. He was genuinely, measurably, the fastest draw in the entertainment industry. He had trained with Arvo Ohahala, the master gunfighter who had coached every major Western star, and Ford had surpassed them all. The training had been obsessive, almost military in its precision. Every morning for 3 years, Ford had practiced the same motion: hand to holster, grip, draw, aim, fire, over and over until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. The result was a draw so fast that studio executives had to use high-speed cameras to time it accurately. 0.4 seconds. That was Ford's record, officially verified and never challenged. On this particular July afternoon, Ford was running through his practice routine between takes. The set had been cleared for safety. Live ammunition was never used, but blanks could still be dangerous at close range. Ford stood alone in the middle of the fake saloon, his Colt .45 gleaming in the studio lights. The crew gathered at a respectful distance to watch the master at work. Ford's draw was a thing of beauty in its efficiency. No wasted motion, no theatrical flourishes, just pure mechanical perfection. The sound of the gun clearing the holster was barely audible, followed immediately by the sharp crack of the blank cartridge. Again and again, Ford repeated the motion. Each draw identical to the last, each one a testament to thousands of hours of practice and an almost inhuman level of self-discipline. That's when Sammy Davis Jr. walked onto the set. Sammy wasn't supposed to be there. He was at MGM to discuss a potential recording contract, but word had spread through the studio that Glenn Ford was practicing his legendary draw. Sammy had always been fascinated by firearms, not from any violent impulse, but from the same curiosity that drove him to master every other skill he encountered. At 31 years old, Sammy was already one of the most versatile entertainers in America. He could sing, dance, act, play multiple instruments, and do impressions that left audiences breathless. But few people knew about his private hobby, gun handling. Not quick-draw gunfighting, but something entirely different: gun spinning, manipulation, trick shooting. He approached firearms the same way he approached everything else, as an art form. Sammy positioned himself at the edge of the set, leaning against a piece of equipment, watching Ford's practice with the intense focus he brought to studying any master craftsman. He wasn't thinking about challenging Ford or competing with him. He was simply appreciating the beauty of perfect technique. Ford noticed him after his 5th draw. He had developed an acute awareness of his surroundings during his gunfighting training, a necessity when dealing with weapons, even fake ones. He turned toward Sammy and smiled, the kind of smile that comes from mutual respect between professionals. "Sammy Davis Jr.," Ford said, his voice carrying easily across the silent set. "I heard you were visiting the lot today." Sammy pushed himself off the equipment and walked toward Ford, his characteristic energy evident in every step. "Glenn Ford," He replied with genuine admiration. "I had to see the famous draw for myself. The stories don't do it justice." Ford holstered his Colt with practiced ease. "Stories have a way of growing in the telling. But I appreciate the kind words." The crew members exchanged glances. Two of the biggest names in entertainment, meeting casually on a Western set, was the kind of moment that would be talked about for years. But none of them suspected they were about to witness something truly legendary. "I understand you have an interest in firearms," Ford said to Sammy. "Arvo Ojala mentioned that you've been asking questions about technique." Sammy's eyes lit up. "Not technique like yours. What you do is pure precision, pure speed. What I do is—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Different." Ford's curiosity was piqued. "Different how?" Instead of answering immediately, Sammy asked, "Mind if I take a look at that Colt?" Ford hesitated for a moment, not from distrust, but from professional caution. His guns were precision instruments, balanced and weighted specifically for his draw technique. But something in Sammy's respectful tone convinced him. He unholstered the Colt and handed it over, butt first. The moment Sammy's fingers closed around the grip, everyone on the set could see that something had changed. Ford held a gun like a tool, functional and efficient. But when Sammy held it, it seemed to transform into something alive, an extension of his own rhythm and energy. Without warning, Sammy's hand began to move, not in Ford's classical quick-draw motion, but in something that looked more like a dance. The gun spun around his finger, flipped through the air, and landed back in his palm with a precision that seemed to defy physics. The crew gasped. This wasn't gunfighting. This was artistry. Ford watched in fascination as Sammy continued the display. The gun moved in ways that seemed impossible, spinning, flipping, twirling through combinations that looked choreographed but were clearly improvisational. And through it all, Sammy's face showed the same concentrated joy he displayed when performing any of his other arts. "Where did you learn to do that?" Ford asked when Sammy finally brought the gun to rest in his palm. "Same place I learned to tap dance," Sammy replied with a grin. "Practice, patience, and the understanding that everything is rhythm." Ford was genuinely impressed. He had spent years mastering the mechanical aspects of gunfighting, but he had never considered the artistic possibilities. "That's incredible, Sammy. But what about speed? Pure draw speed?" Sammy's expression became more serious. "You want to see my draw?" Ford nodded. What happened next became the stuff of legend at MGM Studios. Sammy took the classic gunfighter stance, but something about his posture was different from Ford's. Where Ford was mechanical precision, Sammy was flowing energy. Where Ford eliminated all unnecessary movement, Sammy seemed to incorporate his entire body into the motion. "Count it down," Sammy said to the crew. "3, called out the assistant director. 2, 1. Sammy's draw was unlike anything Ford had ever seen. It wasn't just fast, it was fast with style. The gun seemed to float out of the holster rather than being yanked, moved through the air in a fluid arc that looked almost casual, and settled into firing position with a grace that made Ford's own technique look crude by comparison. The crew was silent, trying to process what they had witnessed. Ford stared at Sammy with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "How fast was that?" Sammy asked. Ford shook his head. "I don't know. I couldn't time it because I was too busy watching it. That wasn't just a draw. That was a performance." Sammy smiled and held out the Colt, offering it back to Ford. "Your turn, champ. Show me that 0.4-second magic." Ford accepted the gun and took his position. The crew held their breath as he prepared to demonstrate the draw that had made him famous. But now, after watching Sammy's artistic approach, Ford's own technique seemed somehow different, more mechanical, less alive. Ford drew with his usual precision. The motion was exactly as it always was. Perfect, efficient, blindingly fast. The blank cartridge cracked like thunder in the enclosed space. The crew applauded, but the applause felt different somehow. Respectful, certainly, but lacking the awe that had followed Sammy's demonstration. Ford holstered his gun and looked at Sammy with new understanding. "I see what you mean about different approaches." "Don't get me wrong," Sammy said quickly. "What you do is incredible. That level of technical mastery, that consistency, it's something I could never achieve." "But what you do," Ford replied, "is something I could never achieve either. You turn technique into art." The two men stood facing each other in the middle of the dusty set, mutual respect evident in their expressions. Around them, the crew sensed that they were witnessing something special, a meeting of two masters who had found different paths to excellence. "You know what the difference is?" Sammy said thoughtfully. "Your speed comes from perfection. Mine comes from survival." Ford raised an eyebrow. "Survival?" Sammy's expression became more serious, reflecting the realities of his life as a black entertainer in 1950s America. "Glenn, you learned to draw fast because you wanted to be the best. I learned because in my world, being fast means staying alive. Being impressive means staying relevant. Being unforgettable means staying employed." The weight of Sammy's words settled over the set. Ford began to understand that what he had seen wasn't just artistic flair. It was the product of a man who had to be extraordinary just to be accepted, who had to turn every skill into a survival tool. "Every performance is life or death for you," Ford said quietly. "Every breath is life or death for me," Sammy replied. "So when I hold a gun, when I draw, when I perform any skill, it's not just about being fast or accurate. It's about creating something so memorable, so unique, that nobody can ever forget it or replace it." Ford nodded slowly, beginning to understand the deeper meaning of their encounter. "Your draw isn't just fast. It's unforgettable. Your draw is a number, Glenn, a measurement. And numbers can be beaten. But this," Sammy gestured to encompass his entire approach, "this is charisma. And charisma doesn't get measured. It gets remembered." Ford smiled, a genuine expression of admiration and understanding. "Speed is a number, Sammy. But what you do, that charisma, that's immortal." The words hung in the air, like the echo of a gunshot. Around them, the crew members knew they had witnessed something special, a moment when two masters had recognized each other's excellence and found truth in their differences. "You know what?" Ford said, breaking the contemplative silence. "I think this calls for a demonstration that neither of us will ever forget." "What did you have in mind?" Sammy asked. Ford grinned. "A real showdown. Not fastest draw, but best draw. You bring your artistry, I'll bring my precision. Let the crew decide which one they'll remember longer." Sammy's eyes lit up with competitive fire. "You're challenging me to a style contest?" "I'm challenging you to be yourself," Ford replied, "and I'll be myself. May the best approach win." What followed was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Ford and Sammy took positions at opposite ends of the set, facing each other across the dusty floor. The crew gathered in a semicircle, understanding that they were about to witness entertainment history. Ford drew first, his motion a masterpiece of mechanical precision. 0.4 seconds of pure efficiency, the gun appearing in his hand as if by magic, the blank cartridge firing with perfect timing. Then Sammy drew, and time seemed to slow down. His motion was fluid, graceful, incorporating spins and flourishes that turned the simple act of drawing a gun into a dance. When he fired, it felt like the natural conclusion of a performance rather than the end of a technical exercise. The crew erupted in applause, but it wasn't competitive applause. It was the appreciation of people who had seen two different kinds of mastery and understood that both were perfect in their own ways. Ford walked across the set and extended his hand to Sammy. "That was incredible! I've never seen anything like it!" Sammy shook Ford's hand warmly. "Neither have I. Your precision is something I'll never be able to match." "And your artistry is something I'll never be able to achieve," Ford replied. As they stood together, hands clasped in mutual respect, the crew began to disperse, chattering excitedly about what they had witnessed. But Ford and Sammy remained for a moment longer, two masters who had found kinship in their differences. "You know what I learned today?" Ford said. What's that? Speed isn't just about how fast you can draw. It's about how quickly you can make people believe in what you're doing. Sammy smiled. And I learned that precision isn't just about technical perfection. It's about making every motion count. The encounter between Glenn Ford and Sammy Davis Jr. on that MGM soundstage became legend, passed down through generations of Hollywood professionals. It was the day when the fastest gun in Hollywood met the most artistic gun handler in America, and both discovered that mastery comes in many forms. Ford continued his career as Hollywood's premier quick-draw artist, but those who knew him said his technique gained a new dimension after that day, a subtle artistry that hadn't been there before. Sammy continued to dazzle audiences with his versatility, but those who watched closely said his performances gained a new precision, a discipline that enhanced rather than constrained his natural creativity. They had challenged each other and elevated each other, proving that true masters don't compete, they inspire. And in the end, the lesson was simple. Speed might make you famous, but charisma makes you immortal. Numbers can be beaten, but artistry lasts forever. And sometimes, the most important showdown isn't about who wins. It's about who learns. The guns were holstered, the cameras stopped rolling, but the respect between two masters would last a lifetime. In a world that often tried to divide people by race, by style, by approach, Ford and Sammy had found unity in excellence and friendship in mutual admiration. That, more than any quick-draw record, was truly unforgettable.